What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to the first Celestial Compass show of 2025. I am Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net, where you will find my forecasts for every week, every new and full moon, and every month. The moon and the monthly forecasts are also at Om Times, and all of them are at my YouTube channel, Professional Aquarian. Before we get into looking at 2025 in particular, I want to update you slightly about where we are as we're recording this. We start 2025 with the planet that rules our action retrograde, and it's moving into the sign of Cancer, a not entirely comfortable place for it. So people might be just a bit more sensitive, frustrated, pushy, touchy, but more importantly, we're going to be revisiting during the rest of the month of January a lot of things that happened in the very beginning of November and back into October of 2024. So see if you can't connect the dots with that. Gradually, our method of thinking, thought, communication is going to be more focused on the concrete, with Mercury moving into Capricorn. So that will be an important thing. That retrograde Mars, however, I should warn you, is a player in the January 13th Cancer full moon, which had a lot of other really exciting activity around it. So bottom line is you might need to snack more than normal, be kind to yourself, take care of your own home, and look for ways to ground more about this later. And again, look for my forecasts for further information. But more importantly, I am so thrilled with our guest today, who's coming back for his third visit, Steve Judd. He read his first astrological book in 1978. He's self-taught. He's now the author of many books himself. He has a site and a YouTube channel with an enormous number of followers. And he has a lot to say about this year. He's currently working on a documentary about the history of astrology, which I would want to ask about briefly. But hey, Steve, thank you so much for being here again.
Hello, Kathy. Yeah, I'm pleased to be back.
Now, a lot of astrologers are saying that 2025 is going to be unlike anything that we have experienced before. And I've certainly been saying things like that. And I think I've been hearing things like that from you as well. Do you have an overall take on what we're heading into? Okay, yeah. We've got 4 hours. Here we go.
In a nutshell, the next 16 to 18 months, our biggest time of concentrated and compressed change in contemporary history. The last time anything this massive happened was around 576 BCE, when there was a conjunction of Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that was the formation of the Greek Empire. That was the birth of Cyrus the Great. It was the first Olympic Games, and it was the start of democracy as we know it. And this is an equivalent in terms of strength. I differ from many other astrologers in that I'm obviously concerned but I'm not really looking so much at the planetary positions according to sign of the zodiac or house, although of course that's relevant. It's more the aspects that concern me, because to me, aspects are number one.
And they're traveling in unison. They're leaving,
Very much.
having been in cahoots in earth and water, and then they're moving into being in cahoots in
It's funny
air
because
and fire.
for years I've been looking at this year and I've been thinking, oh crap, it's getting 2025. I'm thinking, oh my God, we're in for it. And now, in recent months, just in the last month or so, I've been doing all my forecasts for all the signs for all the year. And I've been dealing with a lot of individual clients in the last 6 weeks. And it's really surprising how much my opinions have changed.
Do
Because
tell.
what I'm finding is that in 85% of individual charts, this coming year is looking pretty damn good for them as
That's
individuals. It's the corporates and the nation states and the banks and the governments that are going to get hit big time, because it's a game changer at the macro level, not the micro, I think.
And that is reassuring, because when I talk to people, first off, I've had exactly the same experience with my own client base. Everyone seems to have really empowering and energizing possibilities opening up for them this year. But it there's a shift in how we get to go about things. Oh, I know where I was heading was, people tend to freak out if you give them the big picture. So I think what you're saying is a bit of solace or
Hmm.
consolation for people, like not to freak.
Well, it's
Individually, this could be
actually,
very, very good.
I'd go a bit further than that and say, actually,
Okay,
there's cause for hope,
excellent,
which is a lovely thing to say.
excellent.
Without being too optimistic, of course, because otherwise people will shout at me going, you said this will happen and it didn't. I don't know. Okay. So,
It's the the
but
curse of the astrologer.
yeah, the curse of the astrologer. My glass is half full for this year.
Yours is half full. Mine is refillable. That's the way I'm looking at it. It is refillable because all of this stuff is hitting all of the major defining uh, elements of my own chart. So I'm kind of ground zero for it.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
15% of people are.
Well, okay, okay. So there's a positive potential in all of this for everybody, and it involves a shift in so many different things. So the sequence is Pluto has already moved into Aquarius, so we're getting a foretaste. We've already had a little bit of experience with that. And then Neptune at the end of March moves into Aries, and Saturn at the end of May moves into Aries. And then Uranus, well, Jupiter in June moves into uh, Cancer, which is well, anyway. And then Uranus in July moves into Gemini, which is, and we have as humans in recent history lived through a couple of these. It's the combination of them that's
Mm,
so unusual,
mm.
correct?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just take, for example, the idea of Neptune moving into Aries. For years, I've been thinking, no, I like Neptune in Pisces. But recently I thought, yeah, but Neptune in Pisces, it's been so full of people going, oh, I can't do this because of this. These are the reasons why I'm not succeeding. And my
Mm,
life is so tough and no one feels sorry for me. And it's a bit of a victim position, I'm realizing now. And once Neptune gets into Aries, it's going to go, right, enough of that. Let's just do something.
mhm.
And then Saturn's going to come in. And I know Saturn's not supposed to be very good in Aries because it's strong in its opposite sign. But I think Saturn's going to be glad to get out of Pisces because, again, it's
Right,
going to be like freed up. So
right.
Saturn's going to bring a lot more structure into a Neptunian imagination. It's going to say, let's create something out of this. Let's do
Mhm.
something brand new. Now, every time there's a Saturn Neptune conjunction, something happens in the communist world at the
Oh,
macro level. I mean, the
that's interesting.
Marx Engels manifesto, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Berlin Wall going up, the Berlin Wall coming down, all happened on a Saturn Neptune conjunction. So something's going to happen there. I
Mhm.
suspect we might be seeing the end of what's loosely called the Russian Empire.
Mhm.
But then that's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is the focal point. But underneath that, you've got the Saturn-Pluto sextile, the Saturn-Uranus sextile, which I love, and particularly the Pluto-Uranus trine, which I think is so sexy. if you can describe Pluto-Uranus as sexy, then a trine from Uranus in Gemini to Pluto in Aquarius is like, oh, it really pushes my positive buttons. I really like that. So,
Well, Uranus already has, I mean, Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius, so there's already an affinity there, and the trine just is this
mm,
unfettered something. I don't know. I've been saying to people, "We're gonna have a new internet," and they go, "How can there be a new one?" I'm like, "I don't know." But there's some kind of innovation coming in how
yeah.
we communicate. Would you
Well,
agree?
we're already seeing the forerunner of it with AI, ChatGPT, and AI. And the people are either really terrified of it or they're really getting into it. I'm using it all the time now.
Mm,
I'm using it as opposed to it using me.
mhm.
You know, a lot of people are sitting down there now and writing books and writing songs just using AI. No, I'm writing books and then I'm getting AI to check my grammar and to see if I can put it in a more tighter way. And that's a positive way of using it. I mean,
You're in
it's
charge.
yeah, it's the future. So we either use it or we get like dinosaurs because we can't uninvent things just because we're scared of them.
Seems to me that what you've hinted at or what you've actually touched on with Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries has a lot to do with the individual acting as well, with the
Hmm.
individual taking charge and maybe not overthinking or handing off responsibility to someone else, but just leaping ahead.
Well, let's look at it in a slightly different perspective.
Okay, please.
Um, Without wishing to burst into song and dance, I do think we could say that this is the start of the Aquarius age. And
Mm,
I do think we're beginning to start seeing the end of the old ways of living, as in nation states with borders,
mhm,
nuclear families, the idea of a more communal planet, planet, one species, one tribe, um, of various different genders,
mhm.
seems to be gradually becoming more and more acceptable in people's ideas. And I do suspect that as we get into the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a much greater homogenous. The internet is a great leveler. It's going to bring people in touch all over the world. And of course, there's always going to be the nutcases and the power brokers and the control freaks who want to use it to have power over others. But one of the side effects of all of these big transits is at the individual level, it's opening us up to a higher form of individual consciousness. And by that, I don't mean telepathy or anything like that, but I mean a stronger intuition, sensitivity, and resonance to each other, which, if I was to be from a spiritual perspective, I'd say would encourage a greater degree of empathy and compassion. But in a realistic perspective, I think it's going to really hone and help us trust our own instincts as well as our intuition. So anyone starts coming towards us with ill intent, whether it's individually or collectively, we're going to know instinctively that this is wrong, and we're going to trust that knowing. So I do feel that the days of malfeasance and nastiness, it's going to become more and more obvious what's going on, and people who trust their own judgment are going to be able to walk away from it without anything sticking to them, which would be great.
That's extremely positive.
Yeah, well, I've got the moon in Sag. I'm always trying to look on the bright side. The alternative, of course, is a kind of dystopian future, almost like a Judge Dredd world, where we live under the auspices of a combine of super governments of maybe 3 or 4 global powers, whether they're corporate or national or a mixture of both. And that isn't a type of world I want to live in or I want my grandchildren to live in.
Mhm.
So I prefer to read on the positive, and that's why I'm doing my best to get as much knowledge, information, and data about astrology into the outside world now, because the more people become self-empowered and able to be objective, detached, and impersonal about themselves and their own psychology, the less they're going to buy into the fear and disempowerment, which seems to be the language of the media and everyone else going, don't trust these people, we hate these people, and divide and conquer. I hope we're seeing an end to this type of pattern.
Now, don't you have a particular belief about what astrology could do if it were taught in schools?
I do. I
Yeah,
do. It's not even a belief, it's a certain knowledge.
with certain knowledge. Okay.
I know that if astrology were taught in schools, that within 2 generations, we would see an absolute end to warfare, misogyny, racism, gender issues. Everyone would find their own community, probably dictated by their moon sign, the 12 tribes. And everyone would be able to realize that, okay, everyone's different, but we're all inhabitants of one planet. So we got an interest in getting on and cooperating instead of competing. Without losing our vital edge, I don't want us to turn into a flock of sheep and just cooperate, all eating the Kool-Aid or the grass. But I want to I want people to get on better and stop fighting each other, because it's killing the species. Because without this type of evolution, we as a species are going to be dead in 6 or 7 generations' time. It's pretty obvious.
This year could be a milestone in mindset starting to evolve toward what you see as what we need.
It is a milestone. 2025 and the first half of 2026. I've been waiting for this for 30 years. There's nothing in the next 50 to 100 years of anything like as strong as this. Nothing. So to me, this is the critical time it's almost like the training of humanity. The apprenticeship is over.
Mhm.
And now as a species, we're maturing or not. We're evolving or remaining the same. And if you remain the same, that leads to entropy, decay, and eventually extinction, as opposed to evolution. So I try and be as objective and detached as I can from it at times. And from that perspective, this is a fascinating time in human history. We've never seen anything like this. The potential. You and I are both well old enough to remember what life was like before the internet.
Oh my, yes.
When we did everything by hand, when we drew charts by hand. There's no one alive under 35 now who, at least in the Western world, who's known what it was like before the internet. The internet is a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first wave of a kind of accelerated consciousness revolution. It's giving us more and more knowledge, more and more awareness, more and more freedom, whilst at the same time there is obviously a number of challenges with it. But then again, it's, do we buy into the fear, or do we just do our best to get on with it? So
it's certainly already begun building communities that have nothing to do with geography.
well said. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, because
Now,
that's the way I work now. So I'm sure. I mean, you still do a lot in person.
Yes.
But there's a lot you're doing online as well.
Yes. Particularly at this time, doing readings is my only source of income. So I've got to keep doing that so I can eat. But there's a couple of times, what I did is about 4 weeks ago, I sat down and I worked out every aspect, every sign change, every aspect to each new moon and full moon for the coming 12 months. and then sort of crunched it down into what I saw as 2 or 3 specific trigger points for this year, which are going to be the intense times, 4 of them, as far as I can work out. And one of them has already passed, and that's the last 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that planet, that big lineup in Pisces, late Pisces, at the beginning of April, end of March, beginning of April. There's going to be a 10-day to 12-day period where you're going to have Sun, Mercury, Venus, Neptune, Saturn, North Node, all within 10 degrees of each other, and the full moon, the new moon eclipse at that time. And then there's the period around the second week of June, particularly around the 9th of June, where Mercury moves into Cancer and immediately conjuncts Jupiter at 0 degrees of Cancer and squares Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries. And that's going to be a bit of a weird one as well.
Yeah.
But you know, when I see these kind of aspects in people's charts, I say to them, well, look, you wouldn't be given these challenges if you weren't also going to be given the energy to be able to turn them into gifts. So I used to think I don't want to stick my head above the parapet too much in case I get sniped at. But like now I'm nearly 70, you know, I've had a good life, and my relationship with my mortality is getting healthier and clearer the older I get. I have no fear of death. So I'm going to die at some stage in the next 10 to 20 years. So in what relatively little time I got left, I want to actually make a difference to the world. I know it's arrogant, but I don't care. I want to make a difference to people's lives for the better. And that's why I want to get astrology. And that's why I'm doing this documentary on the history of Western astrology. It's a legacy thing.
Excellent, excellent. So how did that notion come about? Because I'm sure there's the backstory to this.
Well, it came about simply because from a very early age, from the start of my astrological education, from the late 70s onwards, I developed this idea that if astrology were taught in schools, then everyone would evolve at a more accelerated rate, be an end to warfare. And then COVID and Zoom happened at the same time for me. And as COVID developed, so I started teaching hundreds and hundreds of students online. And from that, I've always thought of doing this documentary on the history of Western astrology, but now the technology's there.
Right.
And just in this last year, with the advent of ChatGPT, the potential, what would have taken me a week to write an episode is now taking me a day. So, I mean, I've done about 1 week's worth of readings in the last 4 months because I've been so busy filming and in the studio. So this has taken my life savings.
Oh.
But it's going to be worth it because, well, I hope I'm going to make some money out of it, recoup my expenses. But I'm already seeing, we've already got what we're calling episode 0, the taster, a 15-minute episode of everything we're going to be covering. We've got 9 episodes. Prehistory, as in the stone circles, Sumeria, Chaldea, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt. Episode 2 is Greece, 3 is Rome, 4 is Constantinople through North Africa, Morocco, it's Spain, the Islamic Golden Age. 5 is the European Renaissance. 6 is the magical period of Middle England. 7 is the jumping of astrology into the Americas, North America. 8 is the reversal back into Europe and the discovery of the outer planets. And 9 is the time from 1930 to 2030 with the new technological revolutions, the acceleration of the Western astrology. And it's all based, and it's not to do with casting of horoscopes or teaching people astrology. It's looking at the history of astrology, how it's evolved For example, I spent a week and a half at Delphi and in Mount Olympus and in Athens. And then I spent another week and a half in Rome and then Florence and Bologna. And I learned so much about people like Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, as well as Ptolemy. And these are the gods of astrology. And I found the fundamental, massive difference between the Greek way of seeing the world and the Roman way of seeing the world from history, which I never knew existed before. I mean, the Greeks did not do personal horoscopes. They just did the cosmological. They looked at cycles and the big picture and humanity's relationship with the universe. Whereas the Romans was like, no, not interested in that. When am I going to be emperor? How can I make some money? And it was all about personal readings. And that all happened within 100 and 150 years. It's just fascinating to discover this stuff and observe it. And to actually stand in a basilica in Florence, and 10 yards that side, I've got the tomb of Galileo. And 10 yards that side, I've got the tomb of Michelangelo. I'm walking in the footsteps of giants. I walked in the footsteps of Plato and Aristotle, and I'm living the dream. I'm really living the dream. This is the highlight of my life. It's just, I never thought I could do anything like this, and now I am. And
well, it's incredibly exciting, and I'd like to ask you a lot more about it in just 1 second. I'm going to interrupt you for our only break. So everybody hang on, because we've got a lot more exciting stuff to talk about the history of astrology and more. So be back in a couple of minutes.
Om Times TV.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again? empowermentunlimited.net.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Steve Judd about 2025 and many more things. And right before the break, we were talking about the documentary about the history of astrology that he has been pulling together. And I have been watching your little tiny videos that you've been putting up on your YouTube channel with this, that, different places you've been, experiences that you've had. I have been to almost all of these places, and I know what it's like to be looking at where the Oracle of Delphi was and to stand in the temple, and it's mind blowing. The first time I saw Olympus, I thought the gods are real. They are real. So anything at all you want to talk about the experience you had, places you've been, things that you found that you didn't know besides Rome and Greece looking at things differently?
Well, the Grand Mosque in Cordoba,
Mhm.
biggest mosque outside in the world, outside of Saudi Arabia, and it was built from an architectural perspective in a way that invokes geometry, architecture, and astronomical and astrological patterning. And it just reduces you to tears when you see the perfection of the architecture there. That was awesome. There was other stuff that reduced me to tears for a much more negative reason. The representation of the Inquisition.
Oh, yeah.
I did a little video on the Temple of Light where I tried to invoke a bit of light and a lux. And in the next door tower was where the Inquisition had their headquarters for 300 years. And in this wonderful mosque, which has been repurposed by the Catholic Church around about 700 years ago, when they retook Cordoba from the Islamic world, you've got Christian icons all the way around the edge with all the Islamic architecture in the middle of this incredibly large mosque. And there's a little alcove with a statue of the Virgin Mary with a sword plunged into her chest. And I looked at that and I just thought, oh, and it just hit me. I thought, what? That's horrible. What is that? And I spoke to a wandering priest and I said, what's that about the Virgin Mary with a sword in her chest? And he said, oh, that's to represent the pain of the Mother Mary when her only child was sacrificed on the cross. And I just thought straight away, no, it's not. It's about the church's misogynistic attitude towards women. But that's my own personal opinion, you understand. And I just got down on my knees in front of that statue, crying, and begged for forgiveness for the stupidity of well, humans and men. Because we've lived in a patriarchal society for 2,000 years, and finally the balance is just beginning to shift. One of the conversations I had in Greece was with a young Argentinian astrologer who lives in Greece, who's just finished the MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology and has achieved the highest marks of anyone ever in the 25 years it's been going. And his name's Alejo Lopez. And he's come up with this amazing new idea that it's time to disassociate astrology from much of the mythology that's been its power base for so long. And he's particularly challenging the idea of gender archetypes in astrology, saying, well, now that we've got so many different genders, why do we have to see the sun as male and the moon as female? And I just thought, you got a point there, mate. That's interesting. I want to talk about this. So, you know, it's lovely when you see all these young people coming up with new ideas now, educated ideas as well, not just random internet mutterings, but people who have done the research. And the future of, when you look at the number of young astrologers there are beginning to really surface now,
Right.
compared to 10, 15 years ago, it's wonderful. The future of astrology is in safe hands.
So
And
perhaps astrology has been disseminated because of the web to
yes,
people who might not have had the opportunity to really learn it before.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, books are still relevant, but the internet is a whole, like I say, it's a game changer.
Mhm.
It's also full of crackpot theories, but that's where individual intelligence comes in. So,
Mhm.
wow.
So it sounds like you spoke to a lot. You didn't just look at the history of astrology, but you've met up with other astrologers
I did,
outside of your normal ambit.
yes. So I met with Kostas Levikas, who's a Greek astrologer with over 50 years of academic and personal research. I spoke with Nick Campion, who's perhaps the greatest astrological historian of all time. I spoke with Penny
Right.
Thornton, who's a good friend of mine, who's been doing astrological readings for 50 plus years. And then I spoke to architects masons, geomancers, experts on landscape geometry and stone circles, because really the whole thing is about humanity's interaction between landscape, horizon, heaven and earth, and trying to bring the patterns of heaven down to earth, which is why so many cultures over the millennia have tried to replicate heavenly patterns, stellar constellations and planetary orbital patterns in the architecture on earth. For example, Washington, D.C. is set out to the astronomical constellation of Virgo. This is a well-known fact. Various cities in Europe are set out according to certain stellar patterns as they were 1,500 or 2,000 years ago when these cities were first built. And even today, modern architects will, especially if they're Masons, will, whether it's the Masons, the Rosicrucians, they all know that they're trying to reproduce heaven on earth. This is something that's been going on for thousands of years. And to me, it's just our relationship with the skies and heavens is just, no other species on our planet Earth's history has ever had this type of relationship with the sky before. And yet most people walk around with their head on the ground. And at the moment, especially just in the last 2 days, the moon and Venus together,
Oh, glorious.
Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, it's all up there at the moment. In the first few hours after sunset, it's this last few days and this next week, spectacular night show. I get really enthused when I go out and I just go, there's Mars, there's Jupiter. And I just sort of, I wave at them.
Hello, friends.
Well,
That's
one of the chaps I spoke to is a guy who's done a PhD on what he calls on panpsychism, the idea of the intelligent universe. And he's of the idea that the universe has a form of consciousness. If so, then everything in it is a kind of extension of animism. Animism talks about how plants and rocks have a kind of consciousness. Panpsychism is that the universe has a kind of consciousness. So obviously astrology is a good fit in that. And when you realize that you can actually hear Jupiter on the shortwave radio with its radio bursts, then that's just one example of how we can demonstrate that planetary energy is directly hitting us. Because if it's hitting our radios, it's hitting us.
very true. Well phrased. Very well
So
put.
it's just I feel sometimes as if my brain is almost exploding. It's just it's happening so fast. But I'm not. Yeah, a number of people reckon I'm losing the plot or I'm going mad. And I'm going, well, I'm having fun doing it. And I'm not hurting anyone. So why not?
Sounds like the culmination of a passion of a lifetime. Why not do this? And you're going to share it with lots of people.
I honestly believe that to be true, Kathy. I feel that all the work I've done with astrology since 1977 through to today is now culminating in this documentary. And it's going to be interesting for me to see what I'm going to be getting up to when the last episode of this documentary is released, which hopefully will be at the latest by September of this year. And then what am I going to do? I don't know, but it'll be astrologically connected, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. And who knows who's going to ask you questions now because of this. That's always possible. It'll be more than people like me asking you questions.
Yeah.
One thing I am curious about, you went to a Grange, right? You did go to places that were built to try to capture light at specific moments.
Yes. Yes.
Any new insights about that?
Yes, particularly around the Avebury, Stonehenge, West Kennet, Silbury Hill complex. I haven't been to Newgrange yet. That's scheduled for February, March. And there's various others, Maze Howe in the Orkneys, certain old cave formations in France and Sweden that I want to go to, because yes, the sun will shine deep into these caves on one day a year and illuminate a painting at the end of the cave. This is deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that for at least 15,000 years, humanity has known about the solstices and the equinoxes, and they've built structures or created landscape architecture to commemorate that in stone and to pass it down through the millennia. This is how calendars formed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, modern historians would have it that pre 5000 BCE, humanity was just wandering around in lion skins with spears and grunting. No.
Probably not.
Not true. Not true. I think things are changing. The academic view is changing. I'm even beginning to talk to one or two astronomers, which I thought would never happen, because one or two astronomers are waking up and realizing that, yes, there is more to this than just inert matter.
And fascinatingly, astrology grew out of astronomy. They were a combined science initially, right?
It was only when the telescope was invented that it diversified.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no difference. Astronomy and astrology. I always say astronomy is the study of the movement of the planets and stars in the heavens, and astrology is the study of the effects of those movements. And that's always been the case. And I do feel that now especially now we're seeing we're seeing a much greater balance between the Aristotelian version of astrology, which is more mechanical, fatalistic, predetermined, and the Platonic version of astrology, which is more soul-based and based around things like ethics as much as the mechanics. So I really feel that astrology is really coming to, all different branches are coming together, and there's a kind of new holistic form of astrology beginning to regenerate now, which encompasses both the science and the holistic side of it in a way that's not happened before. And it's really nice to be on the cutting edge of that.
And that sounds very much like what you were saying about where we are astrologically at this moment in time, to bring this conversation full circle.
But it's people like you and me who are doing this by pushing this into the outside world, where we're not so much trying to influence other people's thoughts, we're trying to give other people the option of considering different alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's it. That's got to be a good thing. So
I also have a lot of Sag in my chart, so I am with you on this.
cool.
You
Yeah, well,
and
I've
your
got the name
Sag.
in Sag, so yeah.
Right. So, doubling back, one last thing about 2025 that I had written that I wanted to ask you about that I hadn't. What do you make of the fact that we start the year with Mars retrograde, and then once he gets good and going again, then Venus is immediately retrograde? And Venus is traveling, she kicks her retrograde off at the degree of the solar eclipse that will be coming that Mars rules.
Yeah.
And then she goes back and she melds with Neptune. I have not decided I've not decided what I make of this dance. So I'm curious, what do you think of this being the launching months for 2025?
I noticed that when both Mercury and Venus will go retrograde in early Aries, around 7-8 degrees, 9 degrees of Aries, and both go backwards. And when Mercury stands still and starts moving forwards again, it stands still on top of both the North Node and Neptune for a week. And when Venus goes backwards and stands still, it's conjuncting Saturn for a week. And that's this big collection of planets at the end of Pisces over late March, early April, with the eclipse, partial eclipse of the sun on the 29th of March as the kind of focal point. And this is one of the two biggest points of the year, and in fact, the last few years. And I don't quite know what's going to happen at that time, but it's something to do with the flow of energy, and I'm kind of I'm 50-50 between whether it's some type of massive religious revelation. And I don't know what's happening in America, but in Britain, a lot of the bishops are being hammered now for keeping the lid on child abuse for so long. And it's all coming out. It's all very poisonous. And because of the Piscean connection with the seas, I'm thinking of something along the environmental level. But I'm of the opinion that January and February, with the exception of the first few days of January, which we've been through, January and February are kind of quiet times. And it's only as we get into March through to September, October, that the intensity happens. And then it'll be repeated again in March, April of next year, when all the big transits repeat themselves. And then we're in the new pattern. I mean, it is a scary thing. If you go down the negative side, there's all types of horrible things that could happen here. But I choose not to focus on that.
Don't you think that there's high probability that something involving film in the entertainment world could come about with a big pile up in Pisces with illusion?
I think we're seeing the cult of celebrity approaching a kind of massive escalation and then a big implosion.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I see in the last 6 months that Hollywood has cut its productions by 30 or 40% because AI is now taking over in the films. Actors are losing their, the pay, actors' pay has dropped.
Mm-hmm.
It's changing. So yes, that's a big area of change. Ideally, I'd love to see a lot more free content out in the world. We'll see. I do think that the end of March, start of April is a game changer. It's probably the biggest game changing point of the year. So I'm kind of suspending a lot of things in my personal life until mid-April, because by then I think we'll be able to forecast what the rest of the year is going to be like. And of course, America is going to go through a major catharsis in the coming few months. And that's
I've been forecasting it as well. So,
yes.
But there's one other thing I want to throw into that time period with all the Pisces, and that is Jupiter and Neptune conjoined at 24 degrees Pisces in 2022. Might there be a seed that was planted then that now we see? Maybe, I don't know, possibly. That just hit me yesterday.
I think that's a really good point. And also look at the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of May 2024.
Oh.
I'm not particularly a fan of Jupiter because it's so big and it's just hot air. But whilst it promises more than it delivers, it normally does bring an element of growth and humor, hopefully. So
hopefully,
I'll be pleased to see Jupiter leave Gemini, because then the words will stop and the actions will start.
That's very true. Much more nurturing.
Yeah.
Much more nurturing.
I think the second half of this year is going to be easier than the first.
Easier than the first. Okay. All right, everyone. Hang on to that. And I know that you are under a time constraint, Steve, so I want to start to wrap up. And thank you very, very much for coming back and telling everybody what you think about what's going on this year, what could be happening, and definitely telling us about your documentary. Where are the various places people can find you?
I'm not ready to announce that yet. We're still negotiating. We're not going to be putting it on a major large-scale platform. We're going to be doing it on an independent thing where people will be able to stream it, but not download it. And we're going to be doing it for not micro payments, but minimum payments. So it'll be affordable.
But in terms of your site and your YouTube channel, where can people find you?
Because I'll be making announcements around it at the end of January when the first episode's ready to launch.
Oh, okay. All right. but not the documentary You. Where can people find you?
stevejudd.co is the website, or stevejudd.com. I've got them both. steve@stevejudd.co or .com is the email. And of course, stevejudd@astrology@gmail is
And you
the
have a YouTube channel.
Steve Judd Astrology is the YouTube channel.
All right. And you
And
do
that's my
have
main
releases,
portal.
and you have releases pretty frequently there.
Yeah, and a lot more coming up in the next few months.
Okay. All right. Well, any parting bits of advice for navigating this year?
Only that you can get depressed and downhearted, or you can choose to actually be a lot more positive and upbeat. It is up to you as individuals, but also people like Kathy, me, various others, Penny Thornton, various others who are doing their best to get astrology out into the world. Do a pick and mix, experience as many different opinions as you can, and form your own ideas, because that's the future of astrology.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, I know you're on a tight schedule, so I want to be sure you make it to your next obligation. And thank you very, very much. I wish you tremendous success with your documentary, and I'm really looking forward to following in your footsteps and traveling around the world with you whenever it does come out. So I'll be telling people as soon as I get word, and I'm sure
Thank you very much.
many of
I hope we do this again next year.
I would love it so much. All right. Well, all the best to you for 2025.
Bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye. And everybody else, remember, you can find Steve at stevejudd.co. And I'm at, my forecasts are at omtimes.com. And they're also at empowermentunlimited.net and the Professional Aquarian YouTube channel. And if you want extra bonus stuff, my Patreon is patreon.com/Kathy Beal. And I have a monthly Ask Me Almost Anything where people submit questions and we just hang out and chat. So thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. And have a great 2025, everyone. Bye.